Today, I will be discussing why, quote unquote, being woke is not the problem, but this is. While conservatives have successfully vilified, quote unquote, wokeness, some criticism from the left and center also hold weight. In many cases, political elites and corporate entities have used identity politics and symbolic gestures as a substitute for meaningful economic reforms. Politicians and business leaders frequently offer performative support for diversity and inclusion while actively opposing policies that would materially improve conditions for working people. One clear example of this is how corporations engage in quote unquote woke washing by using progressive rhetoric while simultaneously lobbying against policies that would actually benefit the poor and the middle class. Many companies celebrate Black History Month or LGBTQ plus pride while paying their workers starvation wages, opposing unionization, and exploiting tax loopholes to avoid contributing to social programs. Similarly, politicians often invoke racial justice in their speeches while failing to implement policies that address systematic economic inequality. True social justice is not about representation alone. It requires redistributing power and resources in a way that materially benefits marginalized communities. Real political solutions require moving beyond rhetoric and addressing the structural inequalities that keep millions in poverty or near poverty. Expanding access to economic resources and social services would not only benefit racial minorities, but would also uplift all marginalized communities, including the working poor. This necessitates policies such as universal health care, student debt relief, and labor protections that ensure workers receive fair wages and benefits. To address this deep-seated inequality that persists across race and class, the U.S. must invest in policies that provide economic stability and social mobility. Several proposals have been put forth by progressive economists and policymakers, each with the potential to create lasting structural change. Basic income programs, better known as universal basic income, would provide all citizens with guaranteed financial floors, ensuring that no one falls into absolute poverty. Pilot programs in cities like Stockton, California, have shown that even modest cash payments improve economic security, mental health, and workforce participation. A UBI program could help buffer the effects of automation and precarious employment. Baby bonds, proposed by economist Derek Hamilton and others, would grant every newborn a government-funded trust fund with the amount based on family wealth. By the time the child reaches adulthood, they would have capital to invest in education, home ownership, or entrepreneurship. This would be especially transformative for Black and Latino families who have historically been denied access to wealth-building opportunities due to systematic racism. Free public higher education. Higher education is one of the most effective ways to break the cycle of poverty. Yet skyrocketing tuition costs and student debt prevent millions from pursuing it. Countries such as Germany, Brazil, Mexico, all of Scandinavia offer free public university education as a public good. And many other countries subsidize college so heavily that students do not come out in debt. The U.S. could follow suit by funding tuition-free community college and public universities in general. Universal pre-K, early childhood education has been proven to reduce inequality by giving all children, regardless of socioeconomic background, a strong foundation in literacy and cognitive development. Universal pre-K would not only benefit children, but also relieve financial burdens on working class parents, particularly mothers, who often must choose between work and childcare. Affordable housing initiatives. Housing insecurity is one of the greatest challenges facing low-income Americans and the middle class. Expanding public housing, implementing rent control, or establishing house cooperatives could help counteract the effects of gentrification and real estate speculation that displaces the working class. These policies are not just about assisting the poor, they strengthen the entire economy by creating a more stable, educated, and productive workforce. While conservatives argue that such programs are unaffordable, the reality is that reallocating funds from corporate subsidies, military spendings, and tax breaks for the wealthy could more than cover these initiatives. Economic justice is not just possible, it's necessary for a functioning democracy. Despite historical progressive, systematic inequalities remain deeply ingrained in American society. The resurgence of nationalist ideologies and the political vilification of quote-unquote wokeness serve as mechanisms to preserve existing power structures. Efforts to ban discussions of critical race theory, CRT, and social justice in educational institutions are not about protecting students from indoctrination, as some claim. Rather, these efforts are part of a broader strategy to suppress awareness of economic injustices. Politicians like Donald Trump, Ron DeSantis, and others have attempted to frame quote-unquote wokeness as a radical ideology that threatens democracy. The truth is the opposite is true, right? In reality, the opposite is true. Being quote-unquote woke is essential for protecting democracy. The attack on quote-unquote wokeness is at its core a push to maintain power for the elite while keeping the majority of Americans of all colors economically and politically weak. These attacks on social justice, education are reminiscent of past efforts to maintain racial and class hierarchies. After the Civil War, Southern elites actively worked to suppress Black education, fearing that an educated Black population would challenge white supremacy. Similarly, in the early 20th century, labor activists were branded as communists and persecuted for advocating fair wages and workplace protections. Today's backlash against quote-unquote wokeness is simply the latest iteration of a long-standing pattern. Those in power attempting to silence those who seek to challenge injustice. We also must not seek to erase our identity as a nation. The USA was founded in an age of slavery. Democracy was not inclusive. Indigenous lands were taken, and a third of Mexico was annexed after the Mexican-American War. These are not radical claims. They are historical facts. If acknowledging history means being quote-unquote woke, then why should we remain asleep? Slavery and the foundations of the economy. Enslaved Africans were forced to build the infrastructure of the American economy, from plantations to building critical infrastructure such as roads and buildings without compensation. Their forced labor generated enormous wealth for white elites, much of which continues to benefit their descendants. Acknowledging this does not mean rejecting America. It means recognizing the contributions of those who built it. The dispossession of indigenous lands. The U.S. government systematically removes indigenous peoples from their ancestral lands through policies like the Indian Removal Act of 1830. Manifest Destiny justified these actions, portraying expansion as a divine right rather than a violent seizure of land. The Mexican-American War and territorial expansion. In 1848, the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo ceded vast territories, including California, Arizona, New Mexico, and Texas, to the U.S. Mexican citizens living in these territories were often treated as second-class citizens, reinforcing racial hierarchies. Immigrant labor in the American dream, from Chinese railroad workers in the 19th century to Latino farm workers today, immigrant labor has been instrumental in building the country. The idea that America was built solely by and for white Europeans is historically a falsehood. It's a big lie. Instead of erasing these realities, we should take pride in being a multicultural nation. The people who built this country come from all over the world. A true democracy does not fear diversity, it embraces it. We should not engage in identity politics that is not polycultural. As Vijay Prashad warns against a form of multiculturalism that keeps cultures at a distance rather than recognizing their deep interconnections. American culture is not a collection of isolated ethnic groups, it is a fusion of influences from African, indigenous, European, and Asian traditions. This means moving beyond simplistic diversity initiatives, embracing a true understanding of cultural exchange. As a historian, Robin D.G. Kelly has argued, American culture has always been a quote-unquote mulatto, meaning that it is inherently mixed and hybrid. Recognizing this reality does not diminish any one group. It strengthens our collective identity. Being quote-unquote woke to racial, class, and gender hierarchies is not just beneficial, it's essential for democracy. Ignoring or downplaying systematic injustices only serves to strengthen oppressive power structure. America has progressed only because people stayed quote-unquote woke and demanded change and worked toward a more just and inclusive society. A government that serves only the wealthiest few is not a democracy. True democracy is when every citizen, regardless of race, gender, or class, has equal access to resources, education, and political power. To sleep through this moment in history, to ignore the deep inequalities still present, is to allow democracy to erode. If America is to remain a land of opportunity, it must stay, quote unquote, woke. So wake up, America, and smell the coffee. The future of democracy depends on it. Thank you. Please like, please share, please subscribe, and smash that bell